This is a video on how to configure earning components and deduction components for your payroll. So first of all, when you've logged in, you go to HR module, then locate the settings menu under HR module. Then you locate the payroll settings. So from the payroll settings, you go to earning types. So under earning types, this is where you add the different earning types possible in your company. This is where you add the different earning types. So for starters, you go to create earning type, the name of the earning type, and the description. So once you have saved that, you also do the same for deduction plan. So like for your earnings, you can create housing, you can create meal allowance, telephone allowance, transport allowance, car allowance, all the allowances possible in your company. Likewise, the same for deductions. So once you have created the earning type, the next thing is to configure those earning types individually, like the possible configurations. You go to payroll, you go to components, then under components, this is where you configure all the earning types you have created. So then you go to add components, you see it at the top right of the components page. You go to add components, you select earnings, so it brings you to this configuration page. So this is where I'll be spending some time on to explain everything. So now first thing is you select the earning types. This pulls earning types data from what you have added in settings, in HR settings, like your housing, your transportation. So let's say for example we select house allowance, for instance. So here what is the earning name? We'll still call it house allowance. Then the name in payslip, we can use the same name. That's the name we want it to show on the payslip. So we can just use the same name. Then is it flat amount? Is it percentage of basic salary? Is it percentage of gross pay? So in this case, we can call it flat amount. If it's percentage of basic, that means that any amount that we have entered for basic, this will be percentage of it. If it's percentage of gross pay, that means any amount we entered for gross pay for each person, house allowance will be a percentage of that gross pay. But if it's flat amount, you just enter the fixed amount here, let's say 30,000. Then we click mark this as active, we check the box. So if it's percentage of basic, for instance, you have to enter the percentage here. Let's say 10% of basic, or if it's percentage of gross pay, you enter the percentage here. Let's say 5% of gross pay. You get, so now in this case, flat amount, you say 30K, for instance. Now all these things, this means include this component in employee costs to company. Yes, it is a taxable component, which means tax will be deducted against this particular component, yes or no. So if it's a pre-tax allowance, you tick this checkbox. If it's a post-tax allowance, which means it is not taxable, you make sure it's not checked. Then calculate on pro rata basis, which means that okay, if you divide it by number of working days, if an employee doesn't come to work for a particular day, whether this should be deducted as this should be prorated, which means for any day it doesn't come to work, the employee is not paid for this particular allowance. Then you tick this checkbox if it is prorated. If it is not, you leave it. Then employee pension contribution. You know, employee pension contribution is a percentage of uh, the basic pay. So if you want the percentage to include this as well, you tick this. Let's say for instance, employee pension contribution is 8%, and let's say the basic pay is 60,000, and let's say house allowance is 20,000, that's 80,000. If you want to, if you want this to be part of the employee pension contribution, which means you'll be collecting 8% of the basic plus the house allowance, which is 80,000. So you take this. If you don't want this to be considered for the pension contribution, you make sure it's not ticked. Likewise, the employer pension contribution, the same thing. Then show this component in payslip. If you want it to show on the payslip, you tick this. If you don't want it, you make sure it's not ticked. Then so this flexible benefit plan component, we've not built this out fully yet, so just ignore this for now. So once you have ticked the ones that apply, you save. Then you configure the next one. Let's say you've added allow car allowance. You go to car allowance. After you're done with car allowance, you save. Then you click on new earning again. You go to the next one, telephone allowance. So this is how you configure the earning allowances, the earning components or the allowances for your payroll. Thank you.